Hey, true believers, do you love politics? Do you love comic books? Well, Superhero Politics is for you. Combines the comical nature of politics and the political nature of comic books. Join us, like, share, and experience the world of comics and politics in a way that you never have before. This is Superhero Politics, and I'm your host, Michael Holmes. I believe that The Boys has been one of top 3 to 5 most politically important television series of the last decade. Homelander is not a biography of Donald Trump. He's not just Trump with heat vision. He's something a lot more interesting. Homelander is what happens when the American strongman archetype is given superpowers. There's a lot of common folks who live on farms and live in trailer homes and they make $20 an hour, who look at Donald Trump, same guy who takes a crap on the gold toilet and has a compound that has a wall where none of those common folks can get in, to think that's my guy. The warning is, don't become the crowd that makes Homelander possible.
Capes in the band, let's prove in the booth. Heroes and leaders uncover the proof. Superhero politics, voices collide. Justice and power, we break it down right.
Welcome back, folks, to another episode of Superhero Politics. I'm your host, Michael Holmes, and here on Superhero Politics podcast, we don't use politics to explain comic books. We use comic books to explain politics. Now, if that's your kind of conversation, do me a quick favor. Like this episode, subscribe to the channel, give me a click, and then share this with someone who enjoys a good political or comic book debate. Because that's what we do. We take the comical nature of politics and the political nature of comic books and we smash them together. And so the one thing Superhero Politics has always done is we've built on one simple principle, that great stories create great conversations. And every like, every subscription helps to grow this community. And when you share it with other people, you bring them into the discussion. And that's what we want. The more voices, the better. Now, today we're going to be talking about, it's been enough time. It's been enough time. The series finale ended a couple of weeks ago and everyone's seen it. So no danger of spoilers here. So it's been enough time. So today we're talking about The Boys and the series finale and what Eric Kripke and Garth Ennis did with this final season. Now, if you've been watching The Boys up until this point, it's been not really a slow burn. We could kind of see the way it was going. And the question that I had, and the reason why I was waiting on this episode for so long, is because I wanted to see if they had the courage to do what they were planning to do and finish this series the way they were planning to finish it. And they absolutely did. Now, it was a deviation from the comic books. It was some deviation there, especially with the Black Noir reveal in the comics as a clone of Homelander. It was, some deviation where Soldier Boy gives Homelander the compound V, making him immortal. There was some variation, but all in all, I don't think that was the point. So, we got to talk about this because the point that I believe they were trying to make in the way they established the series, I believe that The Boys has been one of, I'm going to say, top 3 to 5 most politically important television series of the last decade. A lot of people think about The West Wing, they think about Scandal, they think about all, the different political shows, right? But they don't necessarily think about The Boys as a political show because it's centered around comic books and superhero and fantasy. But I know it's a bold statement, but we got to think about this. We got to talk this out. Because for 5 seasons, this show examined everything that ties to American politics. They examined celebrity culture, nationalism, corporate power, the media, religion, political identity, and the increasingly uneasy relationship between democracy and demagoguery. It held up a mirror to America, and we don't always like what we saw. And they asked some tough questions on The Boys. I mean, not always directly, but you knew what they meant. And these questions make people on every side of the political spectrum uncomfortable. They ask questions like, what happens when people stop believing in principles and start believing in personalities? What happens when your political reality is shaped around a political personality? And that brings us to the topic of today. And that's Homelander, right? He's going to be kind of the tongue-in-cheek protagonist of this episode. Like he's going to be the driver. But as we often do, if we have a comic book protagonist, we have his or her political compatriot, kind of the parallel, kind of the comparison here. And let's not dance around it, right? Homelander's Donald Trump. You all were thinking it. And maybe there's not a literal comparison, right? Well, maybe a little bit, right? I mean, don't blame me. The writers explicitly said this, right? They said it. So just the messenger. But Homelander's not Trump in every characteristic, right? But as a political allegory, the comparison is so obvious that pretending otherwise, it would be kind of politically and intellectually dishonest. You know, when we talk about celebrities, Donald Trump was a reality TV star. Homelander was a corporate superhero who existed in movies and propaganda. They both wrapped themselves in the American flag. They both are masters of media and control of the narrative. And Homelander was a man who demanded loyalty above almost anything else. Almost anything else. He didn't care if you were competent. He didn't care how powerful you were. Just that you loved him. Just that you were loyal to him. And, he's a leader whose supporters see a God while his opponents saw the devil. There's no in between with Donald Trump or Homelander. There's just not. Like, you either love him or you don't. And somewhere in there, I guess you could find some begrudging respect, but for the ruthlessness, but there's no in between. Like, it's MAGA and Starlighters, right? It's the parallel. There's no in between. And so the one thing though that Trump and Homelander both understood about America and their versions of America is that attention is power and outrage is currency. And so the writers of Boys, they didn't create these parallels accidentally. They built them from real world events. So I can imagine as they were sitting around scripting the season that they would just turn on CNN or turn on Fox News or turn on, the BBC or whatever it is. And bam, they had their next episode. Probably the only group that had it easier when it came to writing was probably Saturday Night Live. Because a lot of times they just took verbatim what politicians said, particularly Donald Trump said, and just turned it into a skit. But the parallels jumped out of the headlines. And so the boys writer, Kripke and Ennis just had to lean into it. So in this episode, we're going to do what this show has always done. we're going to use a comic book story to have a real political conversation. So we're going to talk about Homelander. We're going to talk about Donald Trump. We're going to talk about MAGA. We're going to talk about the cult of personality, weaponizing patriotism, the dangers of political idolatry, and why the final season of The Boys might be one of the most fascinating pieces of political commentary we've seen in years. And before we're done, I want to ask a question, and I think it sits at the heart of this entire series. Was Homelander created to parody Donald Trump, or was Homelander created to warn us what happens when any democracy starts looking for a superhero instead of a public servant? Now, I'm a huge comic book fan. You guys know that. And I'm also a public official. I'm elected to office. Been in office now for 6 years. And so I understand the trappings of power, even at the local level where I serve. People will call and ask you to do amazing things like, hey, can you come move this tree out of my yard? Like, I'm going to fly over there and lift that giant tree. Now, I'm pretty strong, but can't lift a tree. But people think that we have amazing powers because we were elected to office. And so just kind of a little setup and a little bit of backstory and kind of transition into our topic for tonight. But we're going to break down our protagonist and our subject for this episode. We're going to start with Homelander. Like, who is Homelander? So we've said earlier that Homelander is Donald Trump. And I know half the audience is going to cheer and say, we knew it. And the other half is going to run to the comment section and start roasting me. But Homelander is not a biography of Donald Trump. He's not a caricature. He's not just Trump with heat vision. He's something a lot more interesting. Homelander is what happens when the American strongman archetype is given superpowers. I'm sure if you think about some of the strongmen who have existed in the world, like Stalin and Hitler, Idi Amin, imagine those people having superpowers. And some people say that they did, like the superpower of influence. But the writers of The Boys understood something that political scientists, historians, and students of democracy have understood and tried to impart to the world for centuries, is that people, when they vote, they don't simply vote for leaders. There's something a lot more personal that goes on there. There's a projection. People project themselves onto their leaders. They imbue their leaders with qualities that they may not even possess. So when we think about the creation of Homelander and the soups in the Vought universe and the Boys verse, most of them existed because they were imbued with a chemical compound V that gave them superpowers. And we kind of do that to our leaders. We believe they're smarter. We believe they're more virtuous. We believe that they are infallible, that they always make the right decisions. And people project themselves onto their leaders. And so when they look at people like Donald Trump and the people in the Boys verse look at Homelander, they see their fears. They see their hopes. They see their frustrations. They see their anger. They see their very identity. You know, it's wild because, I mean, I think the comparison between the two still holds up. There's a lot of common people who looked at Homelander and thought, yeah, that's my guy. Like, he's wearing the American flag. He's the strongest person in the world, just like America. USA, USA, USA. Right? But he was unbelievably corrupt. And he had nothing but disdain for regular everyday people who looked up to him as a hero. Now you parallel that with Donald Trump. There's a lot of common folks who live on farms and live in trailer homes, and they make $20 an hour, who look at Donald Trump and think, that's my guy. Same guy who takes a crap on the gold toilet and has a compound that has a wall where none of those common folks can get into, but they identify with him because they see something inside of him. And so when people project onto their leaders, if the conditions are just right, it moves from being just a hero worship to almost a salvation type of a worship. And that's where politics gets dangerous, because citizens are supposed to elect their representatives. They're not supposed to create messiahs. And that's what makes Homelander so uniquely American. Because we pride ourselves on the endurance of democracy and freedom, the First Amendment, equal protection under the law. Don't tread on me. But when the conditions are just right, millions and millions of people in this country would willingly sacrifice their freedoms, sacrifice their rights, sacrifice educational opportunities, their tax dollars. They would sacrifice it all just to feel the security that a strongman leader offers. And Homelander, in the probably the most egregious and the most outwardly expression of strong man. I mean, he literally was the strongest man on the planet, right? He had more power than anyone. And he could have decided that he was going to conquer the country, conquer the planet. He could have done it, physically conquered the planet. But that's not what he wanted. Because at the heart of every villain is a belief that they're actually the hero. So he didn't want the people to be conquered. He didn't want to go out and conquer the people. He wanted them to surrender. He wanted them to love him. And even though he did these heinous things all around the world, he still demanded the adulation. He still demanded that people loved him. He expected it. And that's what probably makes Homelander the most American villain ever created. Because if you think about right now what we're dealing with all around the world, we're embroiled in a war with Iran. We've invaded and stolen taken the leader of Venezuela. We've watched the Gaza Strip get buried. And after destabilizing most of the Southern Hemisphere, we're telling people who are coming here as refugees that they can't come into the country. But we're saying, America, love it or leave it. USA, USA, USA. We're expecting the world to love us, even though to some degree we're playing the villain. Now, I love my country. No disclaimer there. But loving my country also gives me the right to point out where my country has not lived up to its ideals. And this is why I said that Homelander is the most American villain ever created, because he wasn't a foreign invader. He wasn't an alien conqueror. He wasn't a communist. Just the opposite. He was a nationalist, a capitalist. He wasn't a terrorist, I guess not in the traditional sense of what we've outlined as a terrorist today, Homelander was entirely and uniquely American. Homelander represented everything that the outward world sees in America. Homelander is celebrity culture. He's reality TV. He's corporate branding. He's nationalism, white nationalism. He's social media addiction. He's grievance politics. He's influencer culture. He's the 24-hour news cycle. He's political tribalism. Homeland is what happens when entertainment and politics finally become indistinguishable. Several times in the finale, he was kicked up with his feet on the Resolute desk in the White House. So the pull is always to say that the cliche that Homelander is just a genocidal, psychopathic Superman, right? And that's the comic book antithesis. But when we think about who his antithesis is in the political world, the antithesis of Homelander in the political world is our first president, George Washington, who famously, I guess, could not tell a lie, which probably in and of itself was a lie. But when it came to power, he was essentially the polar opposite of Homelander and our current president. George Washington wanted to voluntarily surrender power. He was president, he was elected, appointed, whatever they were doing at the time. And the people said, look, you need to be king. Like, you need to be king. And he said, no, we left kings behind. So he voluntarily surrendered power. But Homelander can't get enough power. You know, he was already the strongest person on earth, but he wanted to be immortal, like Soldier Boy. So he wanted the compound B. Homelander believes institutions should exist to serve him, where Washington believed that institutions matter more than individuals. Washington walked away from power to preserve the Republic. And we know that Homelander would burn it to the damn ground to preserve his power. And that distinction is critical because democracy survives only when leaders understand that they are temporary. I'm in office right now. Like, I can continue to run. I'm not term limited, but at some point in time, the returns of being in office become diminishing, not for the politician, but for the people. Because every politician runs the risk of becoming self-interested when they stay in office. I'd love to believe that I would be as idealistically pure as I am today if I'm serving 6 or 7 terms. But I don't want to take the chance. So when it comes time, I'm walking away. I have a shelf life in politics. And so authoritarianism begins the moment leaders believe that they are indispensable. So is any of this ringing a bell, sounding familiar to folks? Right? Homelander toppled the government from within. He had the president deposed. He, installed his puppet in the executive office. He built monuments to himself. He founded his own religion. Is any of this ringing a bell, folks? If not, it should. Because the America Homelander wanted is the America that Donald Trump is trying to create. And unfortunately, this is not fiction. We've got to live this every single day. Homelander was able to do it because everybody feared him because he was the most powerful suit in the entire verse. The most powerful. Had the most superpowers. He was ruthless in how he used them. And Homelander's image slid into public villainy. And it was a mirror in our own reality because America loves unapologetic patriotism, or what we believe patriotism is. Sometimes it's confused with nationalism. And the thing about Trump and Homelander and that archetype is that they never apologize for exercising their power. And they don't get punished for it. They get rewarded. Homelander blows a man's head off in the streets, and instead of people being reviled, they start cheering, they start clapping. And he looks around like, yeah, I got him. Trump decides that he's going to unleash a mob on the Capitol to stop the certification of an election on January 6, 2021, day that will live in infamy. And what happens? 4 years later, he's reelected president, pardons all those people. And he never apologized. As a matter of fact, he's still claiming he won that election and that there was somehow nefarious actions against him. It's that paranoia. And the public rewards that unapologetic use of power. And so that's always been Trump's real superpower. People have been trying to figure out, political scientists and also for those of you who are listening for the first time, political scientists and economists here alongside the elected officials. So got a little background. But political scientists have been trying to figure out how, right? How? How did he do it? How did America let this happen? How did someone like Donald Trump rise to this power? Now, like, we can explain Homelander, right? He's got superpowers. He's super speed, super strength, vulnerable to some degree. He's heat vision. He can fly, super hearing. He's got all of it. So I can understand the fear that he struck in government's other soups. Donald Trump is a little bit more difficult to explain. But, you know, his strength was never policy. Yeah, I hear all the time he's a businessman. He's rich. He got rich. He's doing, it was never policy. Because to be honest with you, when it comes to policy, he doesn't know his ass from his elbow. Like he doesn't know what's happening. Like you can look at the press conferences. He's not there, right? When it comes to policies, he doesn't understand tariffs. He doesn't understand, currency manipulation. He doesn't understand any of those things. Not in the way that you would expect the leader of the free world to do. He doesn't understand geopolitical maneuvering. He doesn't understand alliances. He really doesn't understand it because he doesn't have to, right? He's so powerful that he really doesn't have to know. And that's like Homelander. Homelander was so powerful, he didn't have to think about consequences. Nobody could check him. For Donald Trump, it was never ideology, because he's not that ideological, right? He does whatever serves him. It wasn't even communication. Like, in terms of being the great communicator, you think about, and I don't think Reagan was that great of a communicator, but, I look at JFK, right? JFK was a sharp speaker. He cut a fine figure and he got to people. The greatest communicator we've ever had in public office was 44. Barack Obama is the gold standard of communication. And some people would say that was his superpower, and that was never Trump, right? Trump's greatest strength was emotional connection, is emotional connection. He is able to lock in on what his base is feeling and turn that into power. Trump understood this in a way that a lot of politicians often miss, because people want to be heard more than they want to be governed. Yeah, don't try to fix it. Just hear me out. Millions of people felt ignored. If we want to get into the how, millions of people felt ignored. Millions felt ignored by Washington. They felt ignored by corporations. They felt ignored by the media. They felt ignored by both political parties. Trump didn't create that frustration. He inherited it, much like his wealth. And then he weaponized it. And he turned it into a political movement. And that's what Homelander does. Homelander takes the discontent, he takes the worship, he takes the fear, and he channels it, gives it a face. Look around. The entire Vault universe, he's on vans that are picking up Starlighters and putting them in concentration camps. He's hanging his face on the side of buildings. Like, to be honest with you, it's almost like The Boys was the live action version of The Simpsons in predicting things. Like, it's wild. But he gave his supporters, both Trump and Homelander, gave their supporters a voice. And then they gave them a target. They gave them someone to turn that anger towards. For Donald Trump, it's his political enemies. It's immigrants. It's gays. It's black people. It's whoever he feels is his opposition. It's former cabinet members who speak out against him. It's political allies who thwart him on policy. For Homelander, it was Starlight. It was Starlight and her supporters. And so he turned his supporters on them. He turned the soup community towards them and pointed them. So the crowd isn't following Homelander just because he's powerful. But Homelander becomes more powerful because the crowd is following him. People thought Donald Trump was a joke. And then the movement started to grow. And the next thing you know, he's the nominee. And people thought there's no way he beats Hillary Clinton, because Hillary Clinton is, by all intents and purposes, a superhero politician. She had it all. But we underestimated Trump's ability to emotionally connect. Didn't get that out. And that's the distinction that a lot of people miss. And it may be the most important political lesson in the entire series. The genius of Homelander isn't that he simply isn't simply evil. He's insecure. He needs applause. He needs affirmation. He needs loyalty. He can't tolerate criticism. Homelander becoming immortal was not just so he could rule forever. His fear wasn't death. His fear was irrelevance. Does that sound familiar? Homelander wanted a lasting, eternal acknowledgement of his presence and his power. It's almost like he wanted to build a giant arch to himself, or put his name on the side of buildings that are named for dead presidents. Because he wanted that legacy to stand, and because of his actions, he was unsure that he would be remembered in the way that he wanted to be remembered, which was in a beloved fashion. And so Trump also built his political movement where loyalty often became more important than ideology. Certain times, policy disagreements can be forgiven if we need a vote, right? But personal loyalty, never. Personal loyalty could not be forgiven. In Homelander's America, truth doesn't matter. Only loyalty matters. In Trump's America, critics would argue that's the same dynamic. So let's take a pause here for a second and take a step back, because that's a lot to digest. And we haven't even gotten to the scary part. The scary part is that Trump nor Homelander created their followers. Trump is a creation of his followers. Homelander was a creation. They don't happen in a vacuum. Characters like Homelander and Donald Trump don't happen in a vacuum. Neither one of them is natural. Donald Trump is not a natural politician. Homelander is not a naturally born superhero. Homelander was made in a lab, given a chemical, bought by a corporation, turned into a weapon. Donald Trump is the most fervent wet dream of every white right-wing think tank that has ever existed in this country. And the catalyst for that, and the catalyst that they used for Homelander was Compound V, and the catalyst that they used to create Donald Trump was having a black president. Nothing would have facilitated Donald Trump's rise without Barack Obama. Some people say, and I've called Trump this before, the bizarro Obama, right? But I think this is where a lot of people, if you're now kind of catching on to the direction of this episode, I think a lot of people get the boys confused, right? They saw like the hedonism and they saw the kind of the villainy and the behind the scenes, and how the suits were portrayed as these honest superheroes, but behind they were just kind of debaucherous and all this other stuff. But the commentary, the subtext and commentary that the boys were putting out in this series is that this can happen. We have a Vought, right? Vought is Fox News and the conservative right-wing ecosystem. Vought is the Republican Party in Congress who surrenders their power, in the Supreme Court who surrender their power, who essentially make the executive immune from any type of accountability. In the series, Vought is the machine that monetizes the outrage, the corporation that sells fear, and business is booming. Business is very good because victimhood sells, conflict sells, and now so does worship. Because if you ever seen a MAGA rally, it's often created an atmosphere that supporters view as a community. They think they're a community, right? But on the outside, the people who are not Trump supporters, it looks like a cult. And the writers of the series took that to its logical conclusions. Homelander supporters didn't just vote for him. They didn't just show up for him. They believed in him. They excused him. They defended him. They reinterpreted their reality to fit his narrative. The individual man became larger than the movement itself. That's why he believed that he was ascending to become God. Not a God, but the God. Like he literally was like, Jesus, your time is up. Like, appreciate you for all you've done in the last couple thousand years, but hey, I'm going to take this thing over across the finish line. And that happened here in real life. It was crazy because right around the time, I think it was episode 5, where Homelander was experiencing his messianic delusion, we were having images of Trump being portrayed as Jesus healing people. That Jesus parallel and that timing, that was, I don't even know if you can script it any better. And that's pretty bold, right? That was a pretty bold statement because Homelander stopped acting like a superhero. He stopped acting like even a president. You know, that was too small for him. He started to act like a god, the God. He didn't ask for support. He demanded worship. And that symbolism is hard to miss, right? The crowds that are reaching forward towards him, the followers that treat any criticism of him as blasphemy, the political loyalty becoming moral righteousness, like you can't love America if you don't support the president. If you've ever watched a Trump cabinet meeting, I like to call it American idolatry. Not American Idol, but American idolatry. Because they go around the table and every one of the cabinet members talk about how much of a joy or an honor it is. They say ridiculous things like, I think, and it's a toss up between serving under you, Mr. President, and the joy of having my kids. Or, yeah, Mr. President, it is the greatest honor of my life to serve in your cabinet. I can only think of one other thing greater. And that's getting married or whatever it is. It's ridiculous. And they all go around the table and they do it. And it's 2 or 3 hours of powerful people genuflecting to the president. And people watch that. And some people are like, wow, he's amazing. And other people are like, and so the boys put that front and center and allowed us to hold up a mirror and say, look, guys, this is happening right now. What happens when politics stop being about governing? It starts becoming about salvation. I alone can fix it starts sounding less like a policy statement and more like scripture. The question is, where and how does this end? Homelander decided it wasn't going to end. He wanted the Compound V to become functionally immortal, able to rule forever, much like violating the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution and illegally going around and trying to get a 3rd term. And that brings us to the finale, like the last episode, episode 8. And this is where we see how this thing ends, right? How this thing kind of is going to end. Homelander loses his power. And he loses it in a way that is ironic because he loses it with the entire world watching on TV. He wanted to broadcast his ascension, but he ultimately ended up broadcasting his downfall. And he's stripped of everything that made him untouchable. And that message is devastating. It's devastating because in the end, you see it wasn't the strength. It wasn't the super strength. It wasn't the flight. It wasn't the heat vision that was the source of his power and what made him believe he was invincible. It was the adulation and the fear of the people. And when his powers got stripped away, his powers were taken, that illusion was broken. And he was just a frightened little man begging for mercy. And the writers aren't saying that dictators are superhuman. They're just saying that they're ordinary people elevated by extraordinary devotion. And that's the lesson of the series. I know we talked about Trump and I know we talked about Homelander and they're part of it, but I don't think that this episode in this series was really about individual characters and their parallels to the real world. I don't think it was about Donald Trump per se or Homelander per se. The boys shined a critical light on what makes America America. Because the truth is uncomfortable. If we want to assign ideology to Homelander, he was pretty much a right-wing archetype, right? But if it happened on the right, it can also happen on the left. People are clamoring for their own unapologetic leftist character. In Maine, a pretty shitty dude, Graham Plattner, just overwhelmingly won the nominee for the Senate race. And because Susan Collins has been a deplorable representative of the state and voted for things that have damaged her community, people overlooked all of the flaws of Graham Plattner. Now, obviously, conservatives cannot throw stones because you've not, like, you're servile to Donald Trump, probably the worst human that's ever occupied political office in this country. You've nominated Ken Paxton. Yeah, just sit this one out, Republicans. But it can happen. And we're seeing it. And increasingly, people on the left who have always said that civility and competence and all these things should win the day are increasingly saying we need our own homelander. We need our own homelander. And if it can happen on the right, it can happen on the left. The environment is right for it. The media environment exists. The outrage economy is booming, even though our regular economy is going down. Celebrity culture is there. Damn near Spencer Pratt, who was a reality TV star from 20 years ago, was in the running to become mayor of LA. The temptation to trade principles for personality is real. And the warning of the boys isn't don't become Homelander. That's a little bit too shallow. The warning is don't become the crowd that makes Homelander possible. Democracy will die long before the dictator shows up. The dictator will just show up to close the casket. But the people will kill democracy. It dies when citizens decide they'd rather have a savior than a servant. I've said on this podcast that superheroes are political because power is political. And the final season of The Boys is that it details that unchecked power corrupts, but uncritical followers corrupt even more. Homelander didn't fall because somebody else was stronger. I mean, after his powers were stripped away, yes, Butcher was stronger. But he fell because the illusion of his invincibility finally broke. And that's the most important lesson that I can give to you all who listen to this episode. As someone who has lived this life, as someone who has been in this game since I was 15, I've seen a lot. I can tell you that the allure of power is real. And I've met a few presidents in my life, and obviously I have a favorite. But no politician is Superman. No politician is Jesus. And the moment we start treating each other or treating one like the other, like either of them, instead of creating a savior or messiah, we have just written the origin story of our greatest villain. Look, you ain't got to agree with me. In fact, I'd be worried if everyone did. But tell me this. Was Homelander always the parody of Trump? Or did America simply evolve to a place where comparison became unavoidable? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Like and subscribe and share. Need you guys. And I know my posting schedule has been a little erratic, but had to get this one out. But there's a lot of things going on in our country that really need us to pull together. We're a community. We're a league. We're stronger together. So drop your thoughts in the comment section. And until next time, always remember, folks, you don't have to be a superhuman to be a superhuman. This is Superhero Politics, and I am Michael Holmes. Until next time.
Justice and power, we break it down right. Yeah, you don't have to be a superhuman to be a superhuman. Welcome to Superhero Politics.
What's going on, true believers? Thank you for your continued and growing support. If you're enjoying the content that we're producing here on Superhero Politics, I ask that you subscribe anywhere that you can find podcasts. That means iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. You can find us at Buzzsprout and also on our social media at Superhero Politics on Twitter, at Superhero Politics on Facebook, Superhero Politics on Instagram, and Superhero Politics on TikTok. Like, share, join us, and if you would have any topics that you would like to share or just questions that you would like to ask me, you can send your emails to superheropolitics@gmail.com, and we'll do an episode where we answer your questions. Thank you for your continued support, and remember, always speak truth to power.